507,560 U2.4 GHz 3.8 Xias plus 6401050 MHz 7500 U2.7 GHz 3.5 GHz 620 Core i57360 U2.3 GHz 3.6 Xias plus 6401000 MHz 4 MB 7300 U2.6 GHz 3.5 GHz 6201100 MHz 3 MB 7287 U3.3 GHz 3.7 Xias plus 6504 MB 7267 U3.1 GHz 3.5 GHz 1050 MHz 7260 U2.2 GHz 3.4 Xias plus 640950 MHz 7200 U2.5 GHz 3.1 GHz 6201000 MHz 3 MB Core i37167 U2.8 GHz /Ares plus 650100 MHz 3 MB 7100 U2.4 GHz 620 Mobile processors, Y series. Processor branding model cores, threads, CPU clock rate CPU turbo clock rate GPU clock rate L3 cache single core dual core base max. Core i7-7Y752, 1.3 GHz 3.6 GHz 3.4 GHz 61530 MHz 1050 MHz 4 MB Core i57Y57 1.2 GHz 3.3 GHz 2.9 GHz 950 MHz 7Y54 3.2 GHz 2.8 Score i37Y30 1.0 GHz 2.6 GHz 900 MHz 7Y321.1 GHz 3.0 GHz Kaby Lake X processors are modified versions of Kaby Lake S processors that fit into the LGA 2066 socket. However, they can't take advantage of the unique features of the platform. High-end desktop processors, X series, processor branding model cores, threads, CPU clock rate CPU turbo clock rate L3 cached Pri, USD, single core dual core quad core i7-7740X4, 8, 4.3 GHz 4.5 GHz 4.4 GHz 4.4 GHz 8 MB 112W$339 Core i5-7640X4, 4.0 GHz 4.2 GHz 4.1 GHz 4.0 GHz 6 MB $242 8th generation Kaby Lake refresh Mobile processors U series processor branding model cores threads clock rate ECPU turbo clock rate GPU clock rate L3 cache L4 cache max. Psilon S release data price as single core dual core quad core base max. Up down core i7-8650 U4 8 1.9 GHz 4.2 GHz 3.9 ZUD 620300 MHz 1150 MHz 8 MB 1215 W25 W10 WQ32017 $409855 U1.8 GHz 4.0 GHz 3.7 Score i58350 U1.7 GHz 3.6 GHz 1100 MHz 6 MB $2978250 U1.6 GHz 3.4 GHz Coffee Lake microarchitecture Coffee Lake is a code name for the 8th generation Intel Core family and was launched in October 2017. For the first time in the 10-year history of Intel Core processors, The Coffee Lake generation features an increase in core counts across the desktop lineup of processors, a significant driver of improved performance versus previous generations despite similar per-clock performance. Increase in number of CPU cores in desktop Coffee Lake processors. Kaby Lake, 7th generation, Coffee Lake, 8th generation, cores /threads cores /threads core i32 /44 /4 core i54 /46 /6 core i74 /86 /12. Intel hyper-threading capabilities allow an enabled processor to execute 2 threads per physical core. Coffee Lake features largely the same CPU core and performance per megahertz as Skylake /Kaby Lake. 73, 74. Features specific to Coffee Lake include following similar refinements to the 14nm process in Skylake and Kaby Lake. Coffee Lake is the third 14nm process refinement, 14nm and plus, and features increased transistor gate pitch for a lower current density and higher leakage transistors, which allows higher peak power and die frequency at the expense of die area and idle power. Coffee Lake will be used in conjunction with the 300 series chipset and is incompatible with the older 100 and 200 series chipsets. 75, 76. Increased L3 cache in accordance to the number of cores. Increased turbo clock speeds across i5 and i7 CPUs models, increased by up to 200 MHz. Increased iGPU clock speeds by 50 MHz. DDR4 memory support updated for 2666 MHz, for i5 and i7 parts, and 2400 MHz, for i3 parts. DDR3 memory is no longer supported. Desktop processors, S-Series, processor branding model cores, threads, basic per clock rate to turbo clock rate, 77 GHz, PUMAX per clock rate L3 cache 8 memory support price, USD, number of cores used 1 2 3 4 5 6 core i7 8086K6, 12. 4.0 GHz 5.0 4.64.54.44.3 UHD 6301.20 GHz 12 MB 95 WDDR4 2666 $4258700 K 3.7 GHz 4.7 $3598700 3.2 GHz 4.64.54.44 4.365 $3038700 T2.4 GHz 4.04.03.93.835 W Core i5 8600 K6, 6. 3.6 GHz 4.34.24.11.15 GHz 9 MB 95 W $2578600 3.1 GHz 65 W $2138600 T2.3 GHz 3.73.63.535 W 8500 3.0 GHz 4.14.03. 91.10 GHz 65 W $1928500 T2.1 GHz 3.53.43.33.235 W84002.8 GHz 4.03.93.81.05 GHz 65 W $1828400 T1.7 GHz 3.33.23.13.035 W Core i38350 K4, 4.0 GHz 1.15 GHz 8 MB 91 WDDR4 2400 $1688300 3.7 GHz 62 W $1388300 T3.2 GHz 35 W 81,003.6 GHz 1.10 GHz 6 MB 65W $1178100 T3.1 GHz 35W Asterisk processors Core i3-8100 and Core i3-8350K with stepping B0 actually belong to Kaby Lake S family. Mobile processors, H series, processor branding model cores, threads, CPU clock rate max. Turbo clock rate GPU clock Ratel cache base max. Core i7-8850H6, 12. 2.6 GHz 4.3 GHz 630350 MHz 1.15 GHz 9M8750H 2.2 GHz 4.1 GHz 1.10 GHz 8700 B 3.2 GHz 4.6 GHz 1.20 GHz 12 Core i5-8500 B6, 6. 3.0 GHz 4.1 GHz 1.10 GHz 9M8400 B 2.8 GHz 4.0 GHz 1.05 GHz 8400 H4, 8. 2.5 GHz 4.2 GHz 1.10 GHz 8M8300 H2.3 GHz 4.0 GHz 1.00 Score i38100 H4, 4. 3.0 GHZN/6M Mobile processors, U series, processor branding model cores, threads, CPU clock rate max. Turbo clock rate GPU clock raw base Mac Core i7-8559U4, 8. 2.7 GHz 4.5 ZS plus 655300 MHz 1.20 Core i5-8269U 2.6 GHz 4.2 GHz 1.10 8259U 2.3 GHz 3.8 GHz 1.05 Core i3-8109U2, 4. 3.0 GHz 3.6 GHz 6301.10 Amber Lake microarchitecture. Amber Lake is a refinement over the low-power mobile Kaby Lake CPUs. Mobile processors, Y series, processor branding model cores, threads, CPU clock rate ECPU-max GPU clock rate L3 cache 8 base max Turbo Core i7-8510 Archive July 28, 2020, at Thule Back Machine 2, 4. 1.8 GHz 3.9 GHz 6171050 MHz 4 MB7WN 8500 Y 1.5 GHz 4.2 GHz 6155 W7W Core i5-8310 Y 1.6 GHz 3.9 GHz 6177 WN 8210 Y 3.6 GHz 8200 Y 1.3 GHz 3.9 GHz 615950 MHz 5W7W Core M38100 Y 1.1 GHz 3.4 GHz 900 MHz 8W Whiskey Lake microarchitecture. Whiskey Lake is Intel's code name for the third 14nm Skylake process refinement, following Kaby Lake Refresh and Coffee Lake. Intel announced low-power mobile Whiskey Lake CPU's availability on the 28th of August, 2018. 7879. It has not yet been advertised whether this CPU architecture contains hardware mitigations for Meltdown /Spectre class vulnerabilities. Various sources contain conflicting information. 80, 81, 79, 82. Unofficially, it was announced that Whiskey Lake has hardware mitigations against Meltdown and L1TF, while Spectre v2 requires software mitigations as well as microcode /firmware update. 83, 84, 85, 86, Architecture. Changes compared to Kaby Lake Refresh. 14 plus and NM process, same as Coffee Lake. Increased turbo clocks, 300-600 MHz. 14 nm PCH. Native USB 3.1 Gen 2 support, 10-bit/s. Integrated 802.11 AC 160 MHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0. Intel Optane memory support. Mobile processors, U-Series. Processor branding model cores, Threads, CPR clock rate turbo clock XNAM of Chorus Pumax GPR clock rate CAC 124 Core i7-8665U4, 8. 1.9 GHz 4.8 UHD 6201150 MHz 8565 U1.8 GHz 4.64.54.1 Core i5-8365 U1.6 GHz 4.11100 MHz 8265 U3.93.93.7 Core i38145 U2, 4, 2.1 GHz 3.93.7 1000 MHz. Cannon Lake Microarchitecture. Cannon Lake, formerly Skymont, is Intel's code name for the 10nm die shrink of the Kaby Lake microarchitecture. As a die shrink, Cannon Lake is a new process in Intel's process architecture optimization execution plan as the next step in semiconductor fabrication. 87. Cannon Lake are the first mainstream PAs to include the AVX512 instruction set. In comparison to the previous generation AVX2, AVX256, the new generation AVX512 most notably provides double the width of data registers and double the number of registers. These enhancements would allow for twice the number of floating point operations per register due to the increased width in addition to doubling the overall number of registers, resulting in theoretical performance improvements of up to 4 times the performance of AVX2.88, 89. At CES 2018, Intel announced that they had started shipping mobile Cannon Lake CPUs at the end of 2017 and that they would ramp up production in 2018. 90, 91, 92. No further details were disclosed. Architecture changes. Compared to Coffee Lake. AVX512 instruction set extension. Intel's first 10nm process technology. Mobile processors, U-Series. Mobile processors, U-Series. Processor branding model cores, Threads, CPR clock rate CPU turbo clock rate GPU clock rate L3 cache base max. Core i38121U, 93, 94, 2, 4. 2.2 GHz 3.2 GHzn/4 MB. 9th generation. Skylake microarchitecture. The 9th generation Skylake CPUs are updated versions of previous Skylake X series CPUs with clock speed improvements. High-end desktop processors, X series. Processor branding model cores /thread space clock single core turbo clock L3 cache 8 Pri Core i99980Xe18/363.0 GHz 4.5 GHz 24.75 MB 165W $1979960 X16/323.1 GHz 22 MB $1684994 X14/283.3 GHz 19.25 MB $138799920 X12/243.5 GHz $1189990 X10/20 $98999820 X3.3 GHz 4.2 GHz 16.5 MB $889 Core i7-9800 500x8/163.8 GHz 4.5 GHz $589. Coffee Lake Refresh Microarchitecture. The 9th generation Coffee Lake CPUs were released in the fourth quarter of 2018. They include hardware mitigations against